Good morning. Thank you for joining me. I'm coming to you from Siloam Missionary Baptist Church, located in Rougemont, North Carolina, where the Reverend Wayne Johnson is pastor. I'll be bringing you the Sunday School lesson for September 3rd, 2023, which is entitled, Be Strong and Courageous. Lesson text comes from Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 6, chapter 11, verses 16 through 19, and verses 21 through 23. Related scriptures comes from Numbers chapter 27, verses 15 through 23, Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 22 through 25, chapter 31, verses 7 through 15, and verses 22 through 23, and chapter 34, verses 5 through 9, and Joshua chapter 22, verses 1 through 9. My name is Charlotte Timberlake. The scripture lesson text reads as thus. Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that have I given unto you, as I said unto Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even unto the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and unto the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your coast. There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Be strong and of a good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land which I swear unto their fathers to give them. So Joshua took all that land, the hills and all the south country, and all the land of Goshen, and the valley, and the plain, and the mountain of Israel, and the valley of the same, even from the Mount Halak that goeth up to Seir, even unto Baalgad, in the valley of Lebanon, under Mount Hermon, and all their kings he took, and smote them, and slew them. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, save the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All other they took in battle. And at that time came Joshua and cut off the Anakims from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua destroyed them utterly with their cities. There was none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod there remained. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. And the land rested from war. May the Lord bless the reading of his word. Golden text. Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord said unto Moses. Joshua chapter 11, verse 23. Today's lesson aim. Facts to show how God kept his promises to his people as Joshua and the people obeyed him. Principle to demonstrate that God is faithful in keeping his promises. Application to teach that when we obey God, we will experience his blessings. Introducing the lesson. Our lesson this week shows us how God's people learn some lessons about trusting their God. He could be trusted because he would never fail them. He is always true. Developing the lesson. Number 1, the promise to lead God's people to their land. Joshua chapter 1 verses 1 through 6. It must be remembered that these promises were given to the people when they were in slavery. Now 40 years later, the promises remain unfulfilled. When we put the promises of God in that context, we understand why it is much easier for them to lose faith than to trust God. God promised Joshua that he would be with him just as he had been with Moses. He would never leave or abandon Joshua. Without the presence of God with us, we are going nowhere. Number 2, the fulfilled promise to help Joshua conquer the land. Joshua chapter 11 verses 16 through 19. We must note that even though God promised to give his people the land that was in enemy hands, they had to conquer the enemies in order to appropriate it. God was going to help them do just that. It is interesting that in accordance with God's promises to his people, they defeated the enemies in their path and then moved in. We are told that the only people who made peace with them were the Hivites of Gibeon, verse 19. The others were defeated. When God assures us of victory, we can move forward in faith. Number 3, the fulfilled promises to God's people. Joshua chapter 11 verses 21 through 23. The truth here is that when God says he is coming through for his children, the rest of the world has to make way. On the basis of God's instructions and promises, Joshua moved through enemy territory, wiping out everyone who stood in his way. God has said that the land would belong to Israel, and nothing was going to keep them from receiving what God had promised. Anakim living in the mountains were destroyed completely and without mercy. This could raise the question of why God destroys other nations, but it would detract from the main point of the lesson. The short answer is that God is always on the side of his people and keeps his word. Verse 23 is a report of victory. The text records for us that God kept his promises to Joshua just as he had with Moses. Like our forefathers, we are called to walk in faith so that we can reap the fruits of the promises of God. I will now go over the questions in the back of the lesson. Question number 1. What title used of Moses was later used also of Joshua? The answer, Moses was known as the servant of the Lord. Joshua chapter 1 verse 1. A title that is repeatedly used for him throughout this book. Joshua chapter 24 verse 29 shows that the title was also used for Joshua by the time of his death. Since Joshua had previously been appointed as Moses' successor, Numbers chapter 27 verses 15 through 23 and Deuteronomy chapter 31 verses 14 through 23, he no doubt took the leadership role immediately after Moses' death. Question number 2. What did the death of the previous leader do to God's plan for his people? The answer, the death of the previous leader did not thwart God's plan for his people. Now it was time for the new leader to move ahead with it. Question number 3. What promise did God give Joshua prior to his entering Canaan? The answer, what an all-inclusive, powerful word this was. Wherever Joshua would lead God's people, God would give them that land. Question number 4. How did God reassure Joshua that the victories would occur, and what was to be Joshua's attitude? The answer: nobody would be able to successfully resist Joshua's advances and victories. The secret of Moses' success had been the constant presence of God, and now Joshua was being reassured that the Lord would be present with him just as he had been with Moses. Question number 5. What was the final phase of warfare for Israel in conquering Canaan? The answer: thus the northern campaign was accomplished quickly, and the city that led the alliance was burned to the ground. Verses 11 through 13. This completed the fulfillment of everything God had commanded Moses, who in turn had passed the command on to Joshua. Question number 6. Why were there so many kings for Joshua to conquer? The answer: every city was considered to be a separate entity, each with its own king. This explains why there were so many kings in one land. Question number 7. About how long did it take for Israel to capture Canaan, and how do we know that? The answer: the long time of verse 18 is about 7 years. Question number 8. What one city was not conquered, and why was it left alone? The answer: there was one exception to the conquering of all the cities, namely Gibeon. In Joshua 9, we read how men from Gibeon came to Joshua pretending to be from a city far away. They carried out an elaborate deception in order to save their lives from destruction. The leaders of Israel, who neglected to seek God's advice about the matter, verse 14, fell for the ploy and made a costly treaty with them. Question number 9. Why was it so important to know that Joshua conquered the Anakim? The answer: the Anakim conquered by Joshua were those giants who had once seemed so invincible. And question number 10. Since God fulfilled his promises, did Israel fully control the land? The answer: Joshua 13 begins by stating that there was still much land to take. All over the land, however, were established points of control from which the Israelites could work and secure their inheritance. God was indeed fulfilling his promises to them. I will now go over the practical points. Number 1, the ultimate fulfillment of God's plan is never dependent on any man. Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. Number 2, when God makes a promise for your future, you can consider it already done. Verses 3 through 4. Number 3, we can take courage in God's promised presence, provision, and protection. Verses 5 through 6. Number 4, God's promises often include our hard work. Chapter 11, verses 16 through 17. Number 5, God fulfills his promises in his time and way. Verses 18 through 19. Number 6, under the authority of God and with his power, no assigned task is too big. Verses 21 through 22. Number 7, God always keeps his promises. Verse 23. In summary, Joshua did not have to rely on his own abilities or knowledge to successfully lead the people. He needed only to trust God, believing the promise he had given. This is what God calls us to do as well. Trust and follow him regardless of the circumstances. We will find God's fullest blessings when we walk by faith, trusting him to fulfill his promises. This will conclude the lesson for this morning. Thank you for listening. Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, for God is with you wherever you go. Joshua chapter 1, verse 9.